Hi, this is Rob Galvin. I will be your presenter today. Um, Thanks for joining. I am responsible for the RhoMobile developer community, which includes our online participation and discussions and webinars, as well as our online documentation for RhoMobile. So today I'm here to talk about JavaScript MVC. And some of the things that we're going to cover is we're going to talk about what is JavaScript MVC and how it's different than what we're providing you in RhoStudio. And then we'll get into some of the reasons why you may want to use this in your application. And then we'll spend a lot of the presentation on actually going through some different criteria that you may want to consider when it comes to selecting the different frameworks. There's a lot of them out there, some more popular than others, and we'll kind of go through some of the different things that at least I started looking at when trying to select a framework for an application that I was looking to develop. Okay, then we'll talk about some of the features that you would typically find in these frameworks, and then spend some time going over the things that you need to consider when using these frameworks with RhoMobile and your RhoMobile applications. And at the end, we'll kind of give you some pointers on how to get started with using these frameworks. So first of all, what is JavaScript MVC? So if you've seen a lot of our RhoMobile demos, you've seen that we've always been kind of based on this MVC model. So this terminology at least may or may not be new to you. And we give you out of the box an MVC approach to developing applications, and it's founded on Ruby on Rails, if you kind of think of it that way. As you can tell from the three-letter acronym, the M stands for model. And this is your data, right? Separating your data from your logic in the form of a controller, and separating all of that from your views or your user interface. So this way you can clearly separate your code. You have a well-structured and manageable set of code where if you want to work on UI components, you're strictly working in the view. And some of these components may or may not really know or care about the underlying components that you have. So it's really a nice way to build an application. You don't end up with spaghetti code, and you can kind of clearly separate and manage your code. So out of the box, when you build an application with RhoStudio and you say file new project, we're setting you up for kind of a Ruby way of doing MVC. This presentation is how do we just use JavaScript to accomplish the same thing? So if you don't want to learn any Ruby, or if you don't want to kind of go down that path that we provide to you, this presentation will help you with understanding the JavaScript way of doing things. One of the best things that you kind of get with these frameworks is this single page app architecture. And this doesn't mean that all your code is in a single page. This is an approach where you can get some really quick responsiveness in your application using Ajax and really kind of loading the page once and just changing the content of the page. It's it was really kind of came about for websites initially to make the experience a lot better and not having to go to the server and do a full turnaround and actually download a new page every time you wanted to do something. But it's also fantastic for mobile applications because typically in mobile app you're dealing with data and your applications is pretty much you only could fit so much information on a screen anyway, so it's good just to kind of change the component of the page instead of having to do full page reloads. And I'll give you a quick demo in a second on that. Another great thing that you usually get with these MVC frameworks is three things basically: templating, and we'll go into detail on all these: templating, routing, and event handling. So templating is about being able to model a view around a particular data object and develop a string-based, or in a couple other ways, a template for your UI. So this way the dynamic pieces that come from your data will be inserted when your page is rendered. Routing gets into kind of being able to get to each state or page of your application from a URL string, right? So we'll spend some time talking about that. And event handling as well, you usually get with these frameworks. So let me jump over and give you a quick demo of what I'm talking about here. So I have my row simulator running, and I developed two different applications kind of doing the same thing. The first version of the application is using what you get out of RhoStudio. So I went into RhoStudio and I built my project, and I did new project, and then developed this application scaffolding, if you will. And then I said, right click new, added a model, and I changed some of the style sheets. But nonetheless, I essentially created this product model. I'm calling it ROM product model, and we have these different views. So when I'm running this application, I have a list of all my products here. I can generate a new product. Click create, and it adds it to my list. I can come in here and say now I have 2, update. I can come in here and delete it. So it's a very simple application, just kind of all your CRUD operations for my product model. Okay. Now, if you looked at while I was doing this, so let me do this again in slow motion here. So let me refresh the page. On the right here, I'm just showing the network tab. Even though all of these pages are loading to the local server that's running on this simulator, we're still showing the network activity, right? So the page is loaded, all of our CSS and JavaScript are loaded, and now when I click new, we're going to go to the new view. Okay, so if you notice, you can see that the page fully reloaded. It took about 60 milliseconds to load this page, and it had to essentially process, which is all of the CSS and JavaScript again, because it's essentially doing a full page reload. Okay, so every operation, whether it's an edit, okay, is doing this full page reload. All of them are taking around 60, 70 milliseconds. Okay. Now, I have the same exact thing, but I'm using a JavaScript MVC framework called Ember.JS. So let me click over to that version of the application. So the initial page load looks very similar in that it's in this case, I have some more JavaScript and CSS that I'm loading because I'm using Ember.JS and handlebars, etc. But what you'll notice that's quite different is, and you may not notice this visually on my machine because it's so fast, but running on a device you'll notice this. But when I click new, you'll notice that nothing happened across the network. Absolutely nothing happened. Okay, it didn't have to go to a server, even though the server's local, and retrieve information. I essentially am just changing the contents of this container. So when I add a new product, okay, it adds it to my data model here. If I want to update it, you can see nothing is happening on the network side. So from a user's point of view, it's super responsive. Even if I want to delete it, it's super responsive in terms of its page reload. So this is the beauty of a single page application. It's very responsive to the user. Also, what these MVC frameworks provide is kind of another layer on top of that, where you'll see one of the features that, as I dive into the features, go over data binding, is that when you're binding things to the user interface, to your data models, things will change automatically. So I have these buttons here wired into my data model quantity, and as I update the quantity, it's instantly updating over here. But then also, if I click on that model, I can see that the quantity has also updated as well. Okay, so these are the things that we'll get into. So just a quick demonstration on the difference, and this project is available for you to look at the source. So Ruby MVC style to JavaScript MVC style using Ember.JS. So now let's talk about when you should use this type of framework. Okay, so in a lot of cases, your applications will have many different views. You'll have views to do a variety of different things. If you have a very simple application, even the application I showed was very simple. It essentially only had a few pages. We have a list here, we have a new page, we have a delete page. Not so complex. Obviously, your application is going to be a lot more complex in that. So when you're constantly changing views, this is a great opportunity to use these JavaScript MVC frameworks just because of the responsiveness. Okay, especially when running on a device. Another good reason is typically your application. A lot of models that I've been seeing from developers is that all the data is on a web server or some backend, and they're really just they have a REST API or some interface to the backend, and they're retrieving it and exposing it, and displaying it on the application. So this is again another perfect reason for using JavaScript MVC frameworks because it lets you easily communicate with a backend and display some data. And when you do have a lot of data that you're dealing with, there's usually a lot of heavy lifting in terms of showing a view for that particular data model, or whether it's a list or whether you need to show different pieces from different data models on one page. There's a lot of heavy lifting that goes in that comes into play when trying to build an application for that. A lot of these frameworks actually provide easy ways to do this out of the box, and you'll see as we dive into some of the differences between these frameworks, but a lot of them will basically provide those common things that you'll have to write yourself. So why reinvent the wheel, right? Why come up with your own templating engine if there's already these templating engines for you, or a way to model your data in JavaScript and have some data binding happening. This is all developed for you, so why not take advantage of it? When I wouldn't use, like I said before, this type of framework is if you have a very simple application, a page or two, and you necessarily don't want to learn a new framework and kind of follow by their rules, then you may just want to just write straight HTML or JavaScript. So let's get into some of the things that you should consider when reviewing these frameworks. So one of the things that I pulled out was one of the factors is around the community adoption. This is usually a good indicator of how much the overall developer community has adopted and are interested in these frameworks. So pulled some numbers on who's watching these different framework providers in terms of GitHub watchers. So you can see that Backbone and Angular are probably the most established JavaScript framework out there with a large community base. Some of these other smaller ones, Batman, Can.JS, are not so large in terms of the community. We have Ember and Meteor kind of up there as well. But you can also see in the past year, this is kind of a year snapshot, that Angular has just exploded in the past year, 400%. So there's got to be some good reason, and there's probably this isn't the only piece of information you're looking at, but again, useful for you to have an indicator of how alive the community is, right? Another kind of thing that's along the same lines is taking a look at Google Trends. So I just did a trend search on these different search terms, Angular.js, Backbone, Ember, Knockout, to take a look at the interest over the past year. And these are, how many times these keywords came up in Google searches. So you can see that Angular and Backbone are always kind of sharing the same spotlight. Ember.JS, Knockout.js are a little bit lower than that. But then earlier this year, in the beginning of this year, we really saw a huge skyrocket for Angular.js. Now it does help that Google is heavily involved in the development of that framework, and it doesn't surprise me that this is getting so much interest. But again, it's just another piece of information that might give you some good insight into community adoption, What are you getting into, and how interested the rest of the community is in these frameworks. You don't want to invest in a framework where nobody's really interested in it, and then it ends up dying a year from now, and you've kind of built your foundation on that. So I think it's important to select something that has a strong future and a strong community behind it. That, as you know, grows the frameworks quite nicely. So along the same lines, we talk about maturity of the framework. So it's important to see, does the framework have, real deployments, real applications? How long have they been around? This is a good indicator of stability of their APIs, right? Their documentation, their samples, all these things that you're going to be looking for as you start developing your application. Backbone is really kind of the big gorilla in the room. It's been around for about 3 years now. Has some really large, scale deployments, and has a good set of documentation, good examples. Some of them, since it's been around for 3 years, may be outdated and not with the current released version, but yeah, so that's probably the most mature on the list here. Right below that is Knockout.JS. They've been around for about 2 years. They also have some good real-world applications and deployments out there as well. And they also have a pretty, very stable API, good set of documentation and examples. Angular.js has been around 2 years now as well, along the same lines as Knockout. It doesn't have as many real world or publicly available known deployments and applications that some of these other frameworks do. But it also has, a good set of documentation with Google behind it. There's a lot of information. And again, like you saw before in the previous slides, with the community adopting, you're going to see information that is contributions from the community, right? Tutorials and examples and sample code, etc. Ember.JS is an interesting case as well. Technically, they're just released their 1.0 version this past August, which is only a few months ago. They've actually were in development for about 2 years. They were called Sprout Core prior to that. So there's been some changes. Some of the examples and things you might find on the internet may not be with the current released 1.0 version, and some of the reviews that you may see with Ember.JS were kind of maybe jaded because of the beta, the nature of the beta and how it's been so long. But as I talk about what these frameworks provide, it doesn't mean you should discount Ember.js, but it's something that you should should put into consideration. It also could be an indication that, hey, they did spend a lot of time in beta, and maybe they feel like they got it right this time, and it's a really solid foundation to build on. So anyway, so maturity is a good indicator for one of the indicators that you should probably be using when you select your frameworks. So now let's talk about size and interoperability of the framework itself. So normally when you look at the size of the JavaScript file or CSS file, the size of the library that you're using, this is important for obviously hosted web applications. May not be so important for a local RhoMobile application where everything's kind of running from the device, but the size does give some indication on a couple of things. How aggressive was the developers in trying to give you everything that you need? Okay. The smaller the size of the library could indicate that, hey, listen, you're going to need to plug in some of these components yourself. We don't give you everything, right? So I kind of divided these up based on size into 2 categories. One of them is they fall more in the line of a library where, this isn't a framework per se. It doesn't give you everything you need. On the positive side, it's going to allow you to easily integrate into maybe some components that you do use. So, let's say you love a particular JavaScript templating engine, and you still want to use JavaScript MVC. Well, maybe a library is more suitable for you because you want to pick all these different components yourself, and you don't want to be told what to do. Now, on the downside, you may have to connect the dots and kind of figure it out. You may not be able to see everything from, let's say, Backbone's website on the different components you need. You may have to figure those things out. Okay. And one of the other good things about the library category is that when you're developing a single page application, you may just want to have components of it represented from your library. So this from your framework or library. So this is a good good opportunity to use one of these libraries. So I put Backbone, Knockout, Spine, and CAN.js in this category. The other category is more of a framework where they're basically kind of giving you almost everything that you need, right? It's a complete solution. You can see Ember.JS is quite larger than a Backbone, 6 kilobytes to 64. So right there, it kind of tells you that Ember's either they're really heavy on the code side, or they're actually providing a lot more components, and it's more of the latter, really. And in those cases, they're really intending to be kind of the whole architecture, right? The whole single page app architecture. They're not looking to just be a piece of it. They'd like to be the whole thing. And as you may interpret from this, you can easily see that these may or may not play well with other frameworks. So if you're looking for something to kind of like piece in all the different things that you want to use, a framework might not be for you. But on the positive side, if you're just getting started and you don't want to figure all this stuff out, then the frameworks might be a better category for you to look at. I have a little star next to Angular. They kind of fit more in the framework side. Like, for example, they actually provide jQuery, or a lighter version of jQuery inside of their application and inside of their framework, and they basically say don't include jQuery in your app. You don't need to, but 9 times out of 10, most people include it anyway. So consider that when you're looking at these frameworks, and think about the approach that you want to take, what you want to provide, what you want the framework to provide, and hopefully this information is helpful. Here's another category that comes into play when you're thinking about which framework to go with. It's their philosophy, right? So I have on here kind of a scale of unopinionated and opinionated. So opinionated is more of, okay, they're setting the rules, right? They are saying, here's what you need to do, here's how you follow it, and if you kind of stray from their path, you may get into trouble, right? Some of them, like Ember.JS, is really kind of like standardizing on things. They're generating a lot of code for you. They even have a standardization for naming conventions, right, for files, and it's good because it kind of things are provided automatically, but if you don't pick up on that, you may stumble on that initially, right? So, and in fact, they, like Ember, for example, they say don't waste your time making trivial choices. That's a quote from their website. So they're really looking to give you everything. I would consider them very, very opinionated. Angular.js is probably less opinionated than Ember. Their opinions are more around testability and dependency injection. They also are very heavy on declarative programming. So you'll see when we talk about templating where that comes into play. But they really want you to do a lot in your declare, in your tags, right? Your HTML tags and less in code. On the other end of the spectrum is more of a unopinionated view, right? So they're kind of giving you some guidance, but they're allowing you to make your own decisions, right? They may give you some guidance on how to set up your file structures or what your routes should look like. They're not going to dictate, what the URL should look like for each of your routes, but they're going to give you some guidance, right? So again, this kind of goes in line with the library versus framework concept. But if you're looking for something where, hey, listen, you don't tell me what to do. I'm an expert in JavaScript. I know what I'm doing. Let me just understand how your framework works or library works. Then you probably want to go with some framework or library that is more on the unopinionated side of the house. All right, so that's some of the things. Of course, there's other factors in considering. Obviously, how well it works with your application and compatibility issues on the particular platforms, etc. Most of these are very similar in terms of browsers they support and platforms they support, etc. So let's talk some more about the actual features of these libraries/frameworks, and then we'll spend some time talking about that. So the first item you'll see is model binding. This is kind of like the most touted and demoed feature out there. All right, so if I go to, I don't know, let me go to Angular.js. I think, yeah. All right, so here's an example. Here we go. So I'm going to add a to-do here. Conquer the world. All right, great apps, right? Probably not in that order, but you kind of get the idea. Is that we have fields kind of data bound to a particular item on your UI. So this is probably one of the most obvious things that you'll see when you start looking into these frameworks, is that this particular feature is demonstrated over and over again in a variety of different ways, right? Here's a screenshot. As I start typing in the search field, it's actually bound to this list, and it's filtering out this list, and this is very easily done in these frameworks. Some of them do it differently than others. There's most of them, I would say, fit into this category called bidirectional. So when you change, let's say all of them will do unidirectional, right? Which is if I change, let's say this input, okay, this JavaScript object that this list is bound to is going to change automatically, right? And CAN.js provides this. But all of the other ones are pretty much bi-directional, which is important, I think, because if you change the JavaScript object in your code, and this comes into play, like for example, if you use RhoConnect, let's say, or you're doing a synchronization, and your data is updated in your JavaScript, you want the UI to automatically refresh without you having to do anything. So this is a bi-directional data binding, okay? And pretty much all of these, except for CAN.js, provide this. Now, some of these, I put in they don't provide anything category, right? You'll see on the websites like Backbone.JS and Spine reference to data binding, but it really requires a little bit more heavy lifting for you to do. And it may not be important to your application. You'll see, like if you don't necessarily need to change a piece of your page while the data is changing, you may not need to have this like bidirectional data binding. If you're just reloading views and you're getting the data anyway, this may or may not be important to you. So just take this information and obviously when you start developing this, you'll look more into it and how complex it is. And each of them kind of do the data binding quite differently. They all kind of follow the same concepts. The concept is you reference something in your markup or in your view as a property of a model, and as the model updates, the view updates as well. All right, so that's kind of the concept around this. And you saw this in the demonstration that I did before in Ember.JS. This is where I have this component here bound to these actions. So when I'm updating this, when I'm clicking on this button, it's actually triggering this model to change, and it's being changed in the model. So when I click on it, you can see the quantity is actually changed. So this is data binding, right? This is an example of this. Okay, so that's kind of feature number one that you'll see. The next feature is about templating. All of them usually provide a templating engine that you will use in your application. Again, thinking about this is very useful for data-driven apps. When you write your markup, you don't want to have to not have it driven programmatically. So there's different ways to do that, right? And overall, both of them kind of follow. In this case, either a string or a text template to represent a view. It can either be a full view, where you're actually doing a full page, or a partial view where you want to update a piece of the page, right? So in the Backbone example here that we did, we're just updating this kind of partial view here of the page. So the important thing here is some of the frameworks actually dictate which template engine you can use. So in the case of Ember.JS, they say you must use handlebars. Handlebars.js is alone a templating engine. Okay, so this example here, and you can see mustache, handlebars, it's basically two curly brackets, and they offer some scripting language, if you will. So in this case, it's saying for each of the people model, show the name field of people. So it's going to list out hello Joe, hello Jim, hello Susie, right? So it's this is where they're in handlebars. They're actually really not trying to provide too much. They just want to give you the basics for having your view represented programmatically, but there's kind of a balancing point where now you start getting into JavaScript, right? And so it's kind of like after a certain point, you break the whole paradigm of, hey, I just want to be in my view. I just want to know about what this thing looks like. I do want to drive it programmatically, but I don't want to have to start doing all this JavaScript and mixing code inside of my view. So handlebars is quite following this line of thought of, hey, it's just a view. Let me give you the basic functionality to programmatically drive your views without giving you too much. Okay, and that's where we get into another templating engine called _JS. Okay, _JS is more akin to the RhoMobile Ruby version. You can even, some of the syntax looks very similar. So this is JavaScript. The underscore is actually a JavaScript engine where they offer a lot of control over programmatically driving your views. Okay, and in some cases, you don't even have to be in the view in the markup to do this. You kind of do it all in JavaScript. So again, this is more about how far you want to go with keeping your view mostly markup, right? And still kind of driving it programmatically. So in this case, we're doing the same thing. The syntax is a little differently, but we're looping through, and it's more JavaScript-like. It is a JavaScript engine. Okay. So some of the frameworks make it optional, like Backbone, Knockout, Spine, where you can kind of pick which one you want. So these are two quite different frameworks. They all kind of give you the same thing. It just depends on how far you want to go. One of the things that drives me a little bit crazy in this is handlebars is being able to specify more options, right? So they give it some ability to customize it, but sometimes I find that this falls short. But for the basic displaying of lists and kind of looping through, they have a decent set of interfaces for displaying your template, for displaying your view. Okay, another way that a framework provides templating is through declarative templating. So this is all about giving you the way to drive your view programmatically, but it's all in the markup. Okay, Angular is really the great example for that, where they really want you to keep your views view code, right? And you're dealing in markup, so just stay in markup, and we'll give you some attributes you can add to your markup, and it essentially attaches behaviors to your markup. So in the example here, you can see that ng-repeat is an Angular expression for looping through the model phones, right? Filtering it by some query and ordering, right? So they really give you a nice, easy way to programmatically drive this list, okay? And you can see some similar notation here to actually get the element name from the model phone and display it here. Okay, so in this case, you're probably going to write less code than you would with the other method for doing templating, and it's going to be very much in your markup, right? So what Angular also provides is the ability to generate your own custom markup. They call it directives. So in this case, I can easily add my own attribute, right? My current time, where there's some, remember, it attaches, it adds behavior and transformation to a DOM element through attributes, okay? So when you run this application, this kind of translates to JavaScript behind the scenes. And it will allow you to, write some custom markup, right? So I'm going to display this field a little differently than it normally would, right? So that's quite nice. Is that it gives you the ability to just, use markup, use a declarative approach for templating, but at the same time still give you some of that customization that you may need with JavaScript code behind it. So I think it's a nice balance actually than some of the other two. It's either or. You need to kind of do this simple approach, code approach, or in this case, it's kind of a nice blend of both worlds. Okay, so that's templating. This is very similar, like I said before, to RhoMobile's Ruby views, where we put in some Ruby code. So one of the most important things is the data storage, right? Remember before, selecting an MVC framework is all about, being used in applications that need data and are data driven, which is quite frankly most of the applications that you see out there. So how do these different frameworks handle data storage? Okay, so when you look at the frameworks, right? So if I go back to my example here, so this is the Ember MVC. Now if I added, let me add one. So I added this model, and I'm not saving it to any local storage or using ROM to save. But if I refresh this page, pretend I exited the application and came back in, it's actually, that record is no longer there. This is some test data that I'm loading when the page loads. So you need to think about how to handle data. In the case of a connected application where you're just all your data is on your back end, and it's okay to to not display data if you're not connected, then maybe just getting everything through REST APIs is okay. So when you're working in these MVC frameworks and you start looking at the models, it's just about the current session, right? So this is about displaying some data on your view represented by a model, right? It doesn't mean that this data is saved anywhere. You actually have to implement that piece of it. So you can either say, okay, let me tie it to my back end, nothing is on the device, right? And use REST, or you can actually save it. You can save it to local storage. You can save it to, in the case of a RhoMobile application, you would tie this into our ROM, our database layer for saving records to the local database. So when the application is reloaded, that data is still there, right? So a lot of the MVC frameworks don't know about Rho, so there's no examples, but you can follow examples where they talk about even talking to REST backends or show an example of saving to HTML5 local storage. You can pretty much follow those steps to do the same thing in Rho. The important thing is that when you get to this point, and I'll kind of go over the sequence that you should kind of do this in, but when you get to this point, each of these frameworks do it and call it differently, right? So in the case of Backbone, they talk about extending the base model class. So they want everything kind of extended from their model class. And this is where you would tie ROM or local storage into Backbone, all right? So when you're thinking, if you're looking at Backbone, you say, okay, great, I understand Backbone now. Let me save the data in ROM. You're going to need to extend the base model class, okay? When it comes to Knockout, they refer to this as develop writing a mapping, right? So in Knockout.js, it's different in that, same type of thing, but they're calling it a mapping. It's not an extension of a base model class. It's this other concept. So you need to look at mapping when you're dealing with Knockout. For Ember and Ember.JS and Angular, they refer to it as an adapter or a service. So in this case, on the right-hand side, this is an example of a Angular adapter. So they call it a factory, right? Where we're extending, we're actually building a service for Angular to do all the CRUD operations. So when the model is saved or loaded, it's going to hook into this service and run this code and retrieve the data from the local storage or create. So this is where we tie in all the row specific APIs. And we have an example of this. I'll get to the end of where to find this. But this is where you'd find it. This is very important. This is where it gets pretty complex. And we'll go over the approach for learning these. But I wanted to bring this up so as you start thinking about using these different frameworks, you have some terminology to use and some information on how to tie in. Now, we talked about applications being disconnected, right? So each of these frameworks kind of handles this differently. So remember, when you're using these frameworks and you're talking about data, everything is saved in kind of the local model reference unless you build this this connection to saving it locally, right? This connection to saving it to some storage is handled quite differently. Some of them send the information. So when you say, let's say, product save, you're trying to save a new product. In some of them, like for example, Backbone, it'll attempt to do this save to the back end. So pretend this is the back end, and it'll attempt to do the save to the back end, and then it'll save it in the client representation of the model. Okay, so this is really driving to keep things in sync. So your mobile device, your mobile application is always in sync with the back end. But if for some reason the back end was not reachable, then the person would basically be stuck, and you'd have to handle this situation. Do you roll it back on your application? You basically kind of almost stop the user from working unless you really build a nice way around that. So not so great for disconnected scenarios. Okay, for the other for scenarios that would be disconnected, you might want to consider like Spine.js. They actually save things on the client side first. So meaning they save it in Spine's model representation, and then they send it to the server. Okay. So in this case, the application is a lot more responsive. It's not waiting for a response back from the server. All the data is saved. Now, all of these frameworks provide the ability to check to see if the data is dirty, or in other words, it hasn't synchronized to the back end. So of course, you'll need to be able to write some code to re-save it to the back end, but this approach is much better for the disconnected scenarios. It's a lot more responsive. Okay. Okay, the next kind of feature that these frameworks or libraries provide is routing, right? So you'll see this is very similar to RhoMobile. If I go into my RhoStudio and I go into my ROM product controller, you can see that we have URLs representing each of the views or the methods that I'm trying to accomplish. So in this case, if I want to do an edit, the URL path for the local web server is going to be romproduct/object_id/edit, right? So this is like routing. Essentially, what it means is I am representing a state or a view of my application through a URL. Okay. And when the URL changes, the state or the view of the application changes as well. So in order to accomplish this, in all of these frameworks, you need to set up the routes, right? So they call these routers, okay? On this example on the left, you can see this is an Ember.JS application where I'm specifying my router for my application. This is actually the code from the app I just showed you, and that when I go to / that it's going to route to my my products view, right? When I provide a product ID after the slash, then I want to go to my edit view. When I go to slash product ID, when you see a colon, this is going to be filled in with a parameter. Slash delete, that means I want to go to my delete view. So it's a nice way to map URLs to particular views and controllers. In this case over here, Angular, it's done very similarly, but it's it's a little bit more code in that we actually have to provide, usually it's a URL with a particular controller or a view, right? In this case, I'm saying slash app is going to go to my home controller, and I'm using this template to drive it, right? In this example, I want to edit a particular ID. Notice the colon here, very similar syntax. I'm going to go to my edit view, and it's going to be driven by this template. Okay, so very similar across the frameworks, and they all provide this routing concept. It's very important because even though you when you're thinking about URLs, you're thinking about like, okay, navigating to different pages. When I am in my application, when I'm in my application, this is actually going to different URLs, right? If I look at this particular URL, I can see it's going to /1. This is my ID for this record. If I look at this one, it's going to probably be /2. Yeah, /2 delete, right? So this is all URLs. Now, this is single page app architecture, so we're not doing full page reloads. It's just using this to represent what's the behavior change, what's the state change, what's the view change, okay? And all of these frameworks provide this concept of routing. All right, so now we kind of went through selection criteria. We talked about some of the features of these frameworks. Now what do you do? How do you tie it into your RhoMobile application? Okay. Well, the first thing I just want to make sure is clear is that when you, let's say you select, in my case, when I selected Ember for this application, what would I have had to do? Okay. Now, when you go in RhoStudio, file, new project, and you say RhoMobile application, and you kind of go through this, it's going to build scaffolding for you. Now, the scaffolding that it builds is all about Ruby, the Ruby MVC, right? So it's going to provide some components, and it's all about this kind of Ruby way of doing things, okay? This way of doing things, all the scaffolding, even adding models and the views that are associated with the models are all around the Ruby concept for Ruby MVC. It has nothing to do with JavaScript MVC. In order to accomplish this, you're essentially just writing JavaScript. So in my case, I have my JavaScript. Let me just show you my other editor because I like Sublime Text too. Here's my application. So for all of my Ember.JS application, it's driven through HTML. So I'm just including HTML. So when I want to go to this application, I'm just going to /public/index.html. And this is where my Ember.js application lives. Everything is in here. All of my JavaScript is in here. So if I look at product controllers, here's my Ember code, right? My product new controller, my product edit controller, right? Here's my models. I have a product model. Okay, here's my fixture data that I was using. So it's all living in this. I just happen to pick public just because that's where I usually put it. But when you build a RhoMobile JavaScript framework application, you essentially you kind of need to ignore the scaffolding, right? You just need to start plugging in your HTML structure, and then the important thing is to actually point to this HTML file. So if I want to start this application in that one, which is what I'm doing, I think, yeah. No, I'm actually starting in this case, I'm starting the app in this version. But if I close this and I wanted to start the application right into my JavaScript MVC framework, I'm just going to do this. Let me save it and run the application again. okay? And it starts right there. So when you're doing this, the first thing to note is pretty much ignore all of the app generators, scaffolding, model generation that we provide. We'll probably provide some examples, and I'll get to this in a minute, on these different frameworks. There's quite a number of them. So the Ruby way of just generating scaffolding is quite easily, and the reason why we don't have it for the JavaScript is there's so many different ways to do it. It's impossible. But essentially what you need to get out of this is just start writing HTML and JavaScript, put it in the public folder, and start your application from that particular instance, okay? So now you got your basics of your application going, and now, like in my case, this application right now is just using Ember.JS. I'm not saving any of this to ROM like I was over here. So I need to now, my next step is to do this. So remember I said before in the previous slide, I need to build, in Ember's case, it's an adapter, right? So now I need to look at Ember's website for how to do an adapter, and I need to build it, which I will, and I'll provide it as an example. I just haven't done it yet. But that would be the next step, is to say, okay, how do I then save this to ROM, which is, what you really want to do if you're not just communicating inside their four walls to a backend. If you want to persist data, you're going to need to save it somewhere. So might as well use ROM. We provide that. We provide JavaScript APIs. It fits quite nicely. And then if you're actually taking it to the next step and you want to integrate it to a RhoConnect application where you want to synchronize maybe a whole bunch of different backends, and this is where you really want to save it to ROM so you get that built-in RhoConnect capabilities of synchronization. And then also, if you want to use push technologies too from a RhoConnect application, you want to consider that as well. So we provided two examples out of the gate for the two most popular frameworks, Backbone and Angular.js, on the docs website. So if you go to docs.RhoMobile.com, let me just do that. Might as well do that. And I go to RhoMobile guides and then look at data handling. You're going to see information about ROM, but you'll see Backbone.JS. So it's an application. It walks you through how this application was built. It tells you about the different libraries that we're using, and you can go through this and download the code and projects. And then we also have a similar one for Angular.js. So it kind of walks through building the application. In this case, we actually need to provide a patch to Angular to get the ORM to work, but it's a pretty minor one. Essentially, it walks through that so you can see how that app was built, and you can download that application. So there's more to come. We're working on other examples as well, looking at these other frameworks like Ember.JS. You saw the example I just did. I'll push that up there, as well as some of the other ones. Probably Knockout would probably be the next one that we do. So stay tuned. There's more to come. We'll do some webinars on this as well to do a deeper dive of these frameworks. Another thing to do to get started is to just when you're thinking about the MVC frameworks, a great resource is todomvc.com. So let me go there. todomvc.com. So this is essentially the same exact application, a to-do list, using the different frameworks. So if I click on Backbone, I could say write a great app, solve world hunger, and then conquer the world. And you can, really kind of see how this application is put together and go through the related resources. And they're all driven the same way. So if I look at Angular, the application looks the same way. Write a great app. So you get the idea. So this is a great resource. Now, the only thing I don't like about this application is it's really a simple app. It's not multi-view, which is one of the benefits of using an MVC framework like this. It's a single view pretty much, but it does have a lot of the concepts that you should get familiar with. It does have some UI things that to me got in the way of explaining the framework, but it's a good way to compare the different versions of this. Okay, so that's a great resource. So I would probably start with that just to kind of get a feeling for it, and then think about all the considerations that we just went over, right? The maturity level, the community adoption, right? The documentation that they provide. A lot of these frameworks, particularly Angular.JS, Knockout.JS, they provide some really good demos. I think Angular is probably the best getting started demo I've seen. As you go through their tutorial, and they walk you through building this application, right? Which is pretty cool because it has some multiple views and a lot of different features, and it gets through all the concepts. So what's great about it is actually a Git repo. So when you're going through it, you can essentially check out different steps of the tutorial and like start from a fresh state. Right, so super duper great. Knockout has a good one too. It's purely online. You don't need to do anything local. It's just right from the browser. You can walk through a tutorial. So check out the tutorials. It's definitely great. I would say I probably should have put a little caution next to the research internet for comparisons, because some of them are jaded to be a certain way. There's a ton of them out there. Just be aware of the time that the comparison was done. A lot of these are, new or kind of new, and it really depends on what versions and the scenarios, etc. But there's definitely a lot of information out there on the internet for you to check out, and of course, reviewing the docs for the examples. And like I said, stay tuned for more to come. So that was it. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope you learned a little bit about MVC. The point was for you to kind of introduce the topic, introduce how you should go about tackling it, and then to start actually trying and using it. So look forward to seeing your killer apps using RhoMobile and JavaScript MVC. Thank you.